Alright, we're here with another episode, NoCaseFavorite.com. Tony Mamaluke, welcome to my show.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. How you doing? How's everything?
Everything's great. How about you? Everything good for you?
I'm good, yeah. Alright, where were you born and raised?
Upstate New York, by way of Gloversville.
And you was raised up there too?
I was raised most of my life. I spent in upstate New York. Went to high school and graduated from upstate New York. And then when I was about 20 years old, I moved to Tampa. That's when I started wrestling.
So you didn't go to college?
No.
No? So you went straight from high school to move to Florida and started training for wrestling?
Yeah, there was a year break in between, but yeah, I went to pro wrestling school instead of college. I almost went to college, had it all signed up, but there was just something inside me that said this wasn't really where I was supposed to be. So that's when I took a year's break, tried to figure out what I need to be doing or where I should be going, and I somehow fell into the pro wrestling business, and that's how I got
Somehow fell into the pro wrestling business. So you mean to tell me you didn't think of it as a kid to want to wrestle or nothing like that?
Well, conventional thought would be that I was entirely too small. When I graduated high school, I was 120 pounds. So the idea of being a professional wrestler seemed to be very crazy and far-fetched. Yeah. So I entertained the idea of maybe dabbling in the world of refereeing in professional wrestling. That's really the first people I ever spoke to in wrestling. I explained to them I'd like to train to be a ref.
Yeah.
And like many other wrestling fans nowadays, I was on the internet and I just happened to be searching websites for videotapes back when you collected tapes, not DVDs. And someone was selling a best of Dean Malenko tape, so I emailed them and said I'd like to buy your tape. Well, that person happened to be a professional wrestler who actually was being trained by Dean Malenko at the time. So instead of
Who was that?
His name was Brian Burnick. You might know him from the Florida territories.
Never heard of him.
He had a shorter career, suffered a lot of concussions, so he kind of had to retire. But he worked out of the Tampa area for a while. He had a short stint in WCW when the four of us were hired by Chris Kanyon by way of DDP via Eric Bischoff when they were trying to establish a different angle where cruiserweights were going to go.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, he was the one who kind of got me really thinking about calling and getting involved and actually going to a wrestling school and training.
What took you from upstate all the way to Florida
to
do this?
The only real reason I ever got into wrestling is because I am the biggest Dean Malenko fan in the world.
Oh, really?
He is the reason I love the business, care about the business.
I already trained you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, that happened to be an added bonus. I have always admired his work. He was the reason I really got into wrestling after, the initial age of 12 where you kind of get out of it and whatnot and you move on with your life. But he brought me back into it with his WCW Monday Nitros and ECW runs and so on and so forth. And when I rediscovered the wrestling industry and the business and happened to fall into someone who actually knew him and passed his number on, and it just took one phone call and I knew I was going to be where I needed to be, which was in Tampa, training to be a wrestler by...
So you called him from upstate,
yeah.
had a conversation with him, decided to go to Florida.
Yeah, it was odd because, for 2 weeks I had the phone number, but I didn't want to call because how often do you get a phone number of someone that you very much admire, who I call my idol?
Yeah, it's happening to me now a lot, so I'm like, I know what you mean.
Well, this is back in the days before the internet kind of.
It don't matter. Trust me, I know what you mean. It don't matter. I don't care about the internet. I'm still flabbergasted.
It is weird, right? It's a very strange thing.
Yeah.
So I waited until I knew he was going to be at Nitro, and I called to see if the voicemail would pick up, and it would be, in fact, Dean Malenko, because I wasn't totally sure this was legit. I didn't know the guy was giving me the phone number. And, it could have been anybody's phone number. So I called and it sounded like him. So I'm like, well, all right, maybe I'll call. So another week passed. I finally got...
What you mean it sounded like he picked up and you hung up?
No, it sounded like his voice on the
answering machine.
Yeah, the answering machine. So I was like, okay, well maybe this really is Malenko. So I waited until I figured out when he should be home, off the road, and I gave a call.
Yeah.
And I simply asked him, are you Dean Simon? I even called him by his shoot name. And sure enough, he answered yes. And I said, well, I'd like to be a professional wrestler, but I'm 120 pounds. He said, well, listen, this is what I'm going to do for you. I'm not going to tell you you're going to get a job. I'm not going to get you a job. I'm not going to get you matches. I'm going to teach you how to wrestle. It's not my job for you to become a star. I'm just going to simply give you the tools to be a professional wrestler. And that's really what kind of sunk in, is like, this guy is really honest with me. And, you know, I wasn't really looking to do that anyway. I mean, come on. I was an undersized kid all the way through my entire adult life, and still, quite frankly, to be honest. And, you know, it just turned out to be my gimmick. But nevertheless, I mean, this guy was being honest. So I said, all right, you know, let's just go down there and do this. So, you know, I packed my stuff the next day, sat on it for 4 months because I had to save up some money. And then the day that I was going to leave, my car died. So I had to wait another 3 months to fix it. So 7 months after the phone call, I ended up being in Tampa, which actually worked out really well.
Did you charge him?
Oh yeah, I paid $1,500 right up front. Otherwise, you do installment payments when the school was open.
For how long, and like, what are you paying for $1,500?
$1,500 was a lifetime membership, although of course they went out of business years ago. But basically, and that was always the standing rule with the Malenko family and their training center, is that once you paid, you could come back forever.
Whenever you want,
and that was another great thing about the school.
So there wasn't a gym fee or nothing?
No, nothing like that.
Because Johnny Ross does the same thing for $3,000, but they charge a gym fee and go in the gym that he worked for, which is $70 a month or something like that.
Well, I really
aside from the 3 G's that you pay him to train you.
Like, I can't really speak for that, but he's also running in a different type of scenario. We ran out of basically what could be considered a garage that opened up on both sides. Actually, there was 2 schools there. One was run by Steve Kern, that would run after we'd get out, and then we had our own school from 5 to 8, and then 8 to 11. It was Steve Kern's deal, but yeah, that was the thing. Like, Malenko didn't really care about the money. He was certainly making enough. It was really his dad's thing, and he was keeping it going.
Oh, okay.
And it was really a family kind of industry, in business. It wasn't really a money-making scenario.
So I was training for you. What was the schedule and drills like?
Well,
and how long did the training last?
There was no real set schedule as far as how the long your training was. It all really depended on how quickly you learned. I mean, we went in there, and the guys that I was learning with, one of them had to be Chad Collier. We just picked up stuff like this.
Yeah.
So we flew through the school as far as like the basic, you know.
What do you call flying through the school? What do you mean?
I mean, it was a great school because Malenko would go in and wrestle and come home and remember stuff and train us on the stuff, and then go put it on TV. So we just went through, you know, all kinds of different moves and whatever. You know, the man of 1,000 holds quite literally doesn't do a justification.
Yeah.
But there wasn't drills. We didn't do cardio. We didn't do weight training. It was simply like he said and like he did. He was straight up. It was all about wrestling. Yeah. If you want to get in shape after the fact or before the fact.
So he taught you psychology.
Yeah.
He taught you kayfabe, your carny lingo, everything.
Not so much the carny lingo, because at that point it's really died out.
So you never learned that at all?
Not officially. I've caught on.
Kayfabe?
Yeah.
So
I mean, you know. Malenko never looked at the business like the way, you know, maybe his dad might have.
Yeah.
He certainly respected that approach.
He mostly,
but he kind of understood.
Wanted to train you to wrestle.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I got you.
I teach you to wrestle. That's what you will learn, and that certainly was the case.
All right, your first break was in WCW. How did that come about?
Another happenstance. Everything that's ever really happened to me in a positive has always been a happenstance. Eric Bischoff had this idea that he was going to create a cruiserweight show that kind of was similar to a loosely based version of the Power Rangers, if you can believe that. So he invested the charge of Chris Kanyon to go around and find new, younger cruiserweights that aren't necessarily luchadors or you know, an Eddie Guerrero type. So Malenko had heard about that, and he told one of the guys that was one of my roommates, Jeremy Lopez, to, hey, why don't you send a tape up here to WCW, excuse me, and I'll pass it on to Kanyon. Great. Well, I didn't get that phone call, and you know, whatever. But I happened to be on Jeremy's tape, so that led Kanyon to say, well, okay, I like both of these guys.
So you didn't even know Kanyon?
I didn't know him at all.
I thought
never
you
met
knew
him
him.
before.
'Cause I heard the story. I thought you knew him at the time.
I met him after this fact, but
Yeah.
I didn't know him at all before this.
I thought you did.
No, that's just
Wow.
not true. So that led, one thing led to another. That's when Brian Burnett got involved.
So
also
he picked
Jamie
you
Noble.
by eye.
Right.
Wow.
And that's also how he discovered Jamie Noble too. We were all on the same.
Kanyon too?
Yeah, we all worked the same territory in Florida together. We, one would wrestle one guy. Like every other. It was more condensed nowadays.
Yeah.
It's unlike up here where everybody runs a show, but. We just did the tours around, and so we were always on each other's tapes and whatnot.
Yeah. Can you speak on Kanyon? Before he passed, I was in a show where you was there and he was there, and I think I had this conversation with you. He was telling me that you were staying with him at the time, and this was about a month before he passed.
Mm.
So, can you speak on him and living together almost at the time of his death?
Well, it wasn't the first time I was ever living in the same house. When I got hired by WCW, he invited me and Jeremy to live in his basement.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. So, excuse me, I'm sorry.
It's alright.
So we lived, we lived there for a few years actually. Because right after we got hired, very shortly thereafter we were released, so we didn't have a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of, that's where I based my time out when I was in ECW, as I lived in Atlanta. So I knew Kanyon on a very personal level.
Yeah.
From that experience from the WCW days and of course after the fact. And when I moved away from that area, when I met my would-be wife and we moved upstate, we kind of separated as far as he was off kind of doing his own thing and moved to Florida, and we were upstate, so we didn't really keep in close contact. And I reached out to him, excuse me again, to see how he was doing. And he indicated that he was trying to open up a wrestling school here in New York City. And he asked if I could help him. Well, I certainly owed him a favor or two. So, after a few months of really planning and getting ready to do this, we decided, okay, if we're going to really do this, then we need to kind of live in close proximity. But New York City is not the easiest place to get an apartment. So we moved in. Me and my wife moved down there, at least for a little while, and we were staying in his house, in his apartment in Sunnyside, and that's how I was living there. It was, unfortunate because he was definitely going through some difficult times.
Did you notice it at the time? This is why I wanted to ask. Did you notice him going through? Because I had a long conversation with him that day, and it was, like I said, about a month before he did that, and he seemed alright, man. He seemed alright. He didn't seem like he was very depressed. We talked about his depression, but he seemed okay, man, and it was real surprising to me that.
Well, I mean, the guy that I first met, maybe 10 years before, and the guy that I had, come to discover was certainly a different person. The depression and the effects of that really had taken hold, in a strong way. Now there were, days and even moments that were, okay.
Yeah.
But I would be, I'd be lying
So you
if I
did
said
see, you didn't know.
it was clearly obvious.
Yeah. Wow, man.
It was
like
sad.
I'm telling you, I had a comment, and I would have never known. Like I would have never
You might have
known
caught him on a
unless he
good day,
told
but,
you.
you live with a guy every
Yeah,
day, you
yeah.
see somebody every day. I mean, my wife and I, it was very difficult on us to just watch. I can't imagine being him.
Really?
Yeah, because we knew Chris when he was Chris Kanyon.
Can you give an example? What kind of any example?
Oh, well, the worst was the fact that he would stay in bed for several days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, classic. I apologize for this.
It's alright, don't worry about it.
Classic signs of
Depression.
Deep depression.
Yeah.
And
Days.
yeah, sometimes, and the worst.
Wow.
And that's why I hate that show, King of Queens, because it would constantly be on, and he would play it at such a very low level you couldn't even hear it. It was just simply a matter of just a very low volume, and just so that there was something, I guess, kind of going on in the room. But it was sad.
Yeah.
This is a guy that got me into WCW, introduced me to a lot of people, who became a very good friend of mine. And to see someone fall that far, it's sad. And
What do you think made him so depressed?
Well, you know, this business is not for everyone, and the people that are in it are not like everyone else. You just, to explain it is impossible because you have to only live it to understand it. I can't tell you why I wrestle because it wouldn't make any sense to
I
me.
don't understand what you're saying.
So when you take away something so very emotionally attached to your everything in your life, then what do you got? Because most of the guys in this business, we live the business.
Why would you say it was taken away? There's a lot of indie circuits right now that he could have made a living. Man. I think he could have made a living.
Well, you know that when you have danced on the biggest stages,
Yeah.
and it just ends one day, it's over.
Yeah.
That's hard. It's happened to me. I've been fired so many goddamn times. I can't tell you how many
Yeah,
times.
I can imagine, man.
But I could
understand.
adjust to it because I didn't experience. I mean, this is a guy that was on TV for 10 years,
Yeah.
and then one day it was over, and that was hard for him to deal with. You know, you have people, and you know, he didn't necessarily have really a job that he could go back to and reference prior to wrestling. An odd job here or there, but I mean, as far as like he basically.
He had a profession. He was making, I think, $70,000 a year before he started wrestling.
Yeah, but that was for a very brief period of time, and if you asked me, he hated every second of it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he didn't want to really go back to that.
Yeah.
And, you
What
know,
was it again he did?
he was a physical therapist.
Yeah, I
He
know
went
it
to
was
school,
some
went to
with
Buffalo
doctor or
for
something.
SUNY Buffalo, but that was never his calling or passion. So when you
Yeah.
took away someone's calling or passion, it's very hard to really adjust to this world. That's why wrestling is very different than other forms of entertainment, because it is so very disconnected from everything else that you can't really relate to anything else. So therefore,
From
it's
what it
hard.
sounds like to me, not for nothing, I think, you know, I don't even want to say it, but you know what? I'm going to say it because it is what it is. From what it sounds like to me, is that he needs to just be a man, you know? Like, that's life, you know? Like, that don't make no sense. Like, you letting it get to you, you know? Like, that don't make no sense. Be a man.
Well,
Stand on your 2 feet, you know? That's a bullshit excuse to me, you know?
You see, but that's an outsider perspective. You can't.
You can
really
look at anything
understand.
in life. Like, come on, if you want to get into my life, you know, my mother was a drug addict, you know, and come on, like, I could have used that and, like...
Well, I mean, I would never sit here and call Chris Kanyon anything other than, you know, he was certainly a man. He had difficulty adjusting to reality. Some people can adjust better than others. Do you think Ric Flair can adjust to reality? He's been a nature boy for 30 years.
I think that's part of being a man. I think if he can't, then he needs to grow the fuck up.
Well, that's your
Any man.
Well, that's
Honestly
your opinion. I mean,
speaking.
you're trying to justify someone else's life without having lived it. I mean, that's not fair.
No, I'm not justifying nothing. I'm just saying that, you know, that's anyway, you know, we could go on for days about this. That don't, anyway. All right.
Can you pause it for a second? I need to put some water in my mouth. Sorry, I'll be right back.